Hey, welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 607. This is the weekly show all about weather. The pre-show, that marvelous, magical time where somebody here will share a boring personal story, a humorous anecdote, or they will say something outrageous. And if I had to guess, it's Kevin.
That was the old.
This is new look. This is some consultant thing. Gonna have your tie loose and hanging around your neck like that?
Yeah, research shows people like that.
You say tracking every other sentence.
Yeah.
Have your tie loosened.
It's the next version of suspenders.
Great. Hey, tap your mic and be sure it's you got the right one on there.
I might have adjusted something.
I think you're good. Yeah, I think it was just too far away.
I think the gain got turned down too. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yes, loud and clear. Brian, so you okay? You look tense.
Nope, not tense.
Brian was out in the tornado last week.
You mean missing the tornado?
Well, I did. You don't have to come out and say that. I mean, we just happened to have a fixed camera at the side of the tornado touchdown, so all is well.
I can't believe we were there when nothing was happening.
That's the way it works in weather sometimes.
That's part of the frustration of storm chasing.
It is. It's just part of the mystique of it all. So, man, we got weather going on here. We got so much to talk about.
All right, so we'll have Mike Gerber for the first 25, 30 minutes, and then run the recorded segments, James, and then we'll bring the other two guys in.
Okay.
And they're going to talk about their experience in Harvey and then go on to talk about Irma. So that second half will be our Irma discussion.
This is very odd. I kind of feel things, and the social media traffic is just stunning, the volume, and I sure can't see it all. But for some reason, there just seems to be a lot of people wish casting this hurricane into the central Gulf Coast, almost demanding it. Some guy told me I should apologize
for what?
For showing the Hurricane Center track and the models that turn this to the right, saying that I know that it's coming up toward the central Gulf Coast, and I'm not telling people not to panic them. Speaking of Gulf shores and places like that, I've been called today a denier. Yeah, last week I was called a skinhead, which I am. I mean, that's
what are you complaining about there?
Yeah, about to say. I mean, but I think the same guy called me a neo-Nazi. And I'm just posting weather information. I mean, the times have changed. I mean,
well, there were 120,000 page views on the blog today, which is a solid severe weather day.
No, I'm driving you some traffic. Half of my tweets is just links to the blog. I mean, but the Facebook traffic is just like I just posted something, and already it's got almost 300 comments within 15 minutes, and they're all fighting. They're fighting, and most of them think they know better than anybody else. You know, all the stuff I'm putting on there is bogus. They know these mental giants know where this thing's going. It is a very. I didn't really expect this. I mean, it is a wish cast. They're almost demanding. I show some maps that bring this thing up to Mobile Bay.
Where's this on your Facebook page?
Yeah. And I hide a lot of this stuff. Like for the ones that are really bad, I don't delete them. I just hide them, which you can do. I don't know. It's just bizarre. And apparently there's panic in Mobile. I don't know who's telling people it's coming up to Mobile Bay, but I'm seeing pictures of there's no water. There's runs on the Costco and the Sam's Club and all that.
Yeah, that's actually, I got a friend of mine works in Biloxi, and he says stuff's pretty much out already.
Oh, good gosh. You know, I kind of understand it in South Florida.
I'm worried about Northeast Florida, and
he says there's
my people to the Costco yet.
Yeah, there's a certain built-in uneasiness, because they got pounded by Katrina there. I mean, all the headlines went to New Orleans, but Gulfport, Biloxi, there's a certain built-in, but it's a little early.
Yeah,
but
this is kind of a rebound hurricane, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They went through Gustav, though, somewhere along there, southeast Louisiana, 08 or so.
But the most of these people think that this thing can't turn. It cannot do it. It will not happen, and it's going to come to Mobile. And we are media, fake news, cover-ups, and
the model spread started widening this evening.
The European members are pretty wide.
Yep. I always love that South Florida. That's the old age-old South Florida water management.
That thing's been there forever.
I know, but that has really widened and come a little east just as opposed to this afternoon.
Yes, it has.
Maybe we should talk about it on the show.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that trend is right, because I have family in Fort Myers in Southwest Florida.
We don't have to hit at the bottom of the hour. Hey, Mike, can you hear us? I'm sorry, you're here. Can you hear us okay?
You're sorry I'm here, huh?
No, I apologize for not acknowledging that you were here.
My wife says the same thing all the time. No, I'm here.
Foolish comments.
He says that to all the guests, but usually it's at the end of the show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the models rotates it up into Alabama and circles it around Birmingham and then shifts it on out east.
That trough has changed its mind too many times for it to just come right and take that right turn and go up right to Florida. It's just there's too much beyond 72, 84 hours. There's too much variation there. Something different.
But do you put any sort of stock in the hurricane subsidence being able to strengthen the trough a little bit to the north of it? I always heard that a long time ago.
I can't say that I have, but that's interesting. What I always felt, and this goes back to the old, remember James, that old Difax charts that would print out one line at a time in the Channel 6 office. But I just developed this anecdotal only theory that 84-hour chart, when you get inside of that, there's just some influence from the hurricane on things that are not right. I can't prove it. It's just, like I said, anecdotal. But that trough has changed its mind too many times on the models for it to be right. I don't think we know.
So Alex Lammers says that the drop zone in the northeast eyewall had 196 knot wind, 19 millibars above the surface.
Wow.
167 knots in the lowest reported level. I mean, you're starting to get 190 there? That might be a 190. This might be Hurricane Allen.
It's doing an eyewall replacement, though.
So it'll fluctuate.
ERC. Hey, let's get this thing going here.
Well, we've done it all. Aren't we done?
Okay,
yeah, we're done. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for listening. It's been real.
Next week's guest will be.
People say they like the pre-show better than anything else. I saw an email that said that this week. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains episode number 607 for the 5th of September, 2017. We're getting into the climatological peak of the hurricane season, and we are now into meteorological fall. I just like saying that, Brian Peters. Do you like fall?
I do. I love the dew points we're forecasting here, and I love the temperatures. I love it when it's below seasonal averages. That's always great.
Question is, down here in the deep south where we are, I wonder if just maybe, and it's no guarantee, we can have hot spells into October, but just maybe we've seen the last 90, which is interesting.
You just jinxed us.
I totally jinxed it. This has been like a year without a summer where we are down here. It's been just so mild and comfortable, just creepy.
Wet.
I mean, August ended up being what? Only about 1.5 degrees or almost 2 degrees below the seasonal average, but it sure seemed cool.
But I think the nights were okay, but it was the daytime highs that were, well below average. So
yeah,
but very, very comfortable summer for us. So we'll see where it goes. Kevin Selly is located in Wichita Falls, Texas, with his TV clothes on tonight, halfway. Kevin is halfway nude.
There's your show title.
Yeah,
the show title for this week. Yeah.
Yeah, our dew points dropped into the 40s today, which is really nice behind a nice cold front. Which our dew points were up this summer. It wasn't all that hot because obviously the dew points were up, but it was pretty uncomfortable. But you know what occurs to me is you started the show, and we talked about this. I guess was it last week or the week before with Rick, doing all these backup things. You know, they practice all. You know, the one office takes over for another if you have to evacuate, yada yada. But where is the backup plan for this show? Since I'm serious now. Since since Irma's going to come screaming right up through Alabama, according to some.
James is suppressing that information.
What happens if James has to evacuate or go to an undisclosed location? How is this show going to happen? I've not heard of this plan. Does it exist?
Yes, it's called Greenbrier in West Virginia. That's where we send it.
Yeah, it's called stealing Wi-Fi.
You're going to do it. You're going to do it from your car outside of the Best Western Motel. Is that it?
Oh, James's preference is Days Inns.
Days in.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, they have better bandwidth.
Yeah. As long as there is a plan, I'm comfortable. I don't care what it is, but it just seemed to me that we should have one.
Before
we have a secret underground bunker down at Eglin Air Force Base where we all go underground when that happens.
Okay. So that's good. That's a good place to go in a hurricane.
Yeah, James used to have all the unprotected Wi-Fi motels around the landscape. You'd be like, "Why are you getting off of this exit?" He'd be like, "They got free Wi-Fi over here today." And he's pulling the parking lot. They'd see him coming and disconnect the internet.
So while I'm thinking this, so the last time we had a Category 5, and I don't think Irma's going to be a 5 at landfall, but the last time we had a 5 making landfall on the United States coast was Andrew in 1992. I'm trying to think what was technology like, the communications. I want to say most people were on either Prodigy or CompuServe back then.
Wow.
Dabble in this.
Yeah, barely that.
We were
called Weather Matrix or something. I don't remember what it was, but you downloaded it over. I had a telex terminal, for God's sake, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we were using a 300 or maybe a 1200 baud modem back then.
Yeah, I had I guess a WSI, dot matrix printer that spit out all the DIFAX charts.
I had a Digital Equipment Corporation 386 PC, and I think the modem was 9600 baud when I was doing the WeatherFax thing.
There you go.
Okay, well that's cool. But no, I was a CompuServe guy. I almost remember my CompuServe number. Yeah, you had to have a long number.
I remember my password, James. That's the fun part.
I never logged into Prodigy, but Kevin, remember we could take the weather program off that computer, take it down, and bring up
Oop, I've lost bandwidth somehow, or James has.
Yeah,
James has.
I hear you. Fine, maybe James.
Hello, did I go away?
You went away for a minute there.
Temporarily.
I think you were at 9600 baud.
Yeah, on my 9600 baud modem. But Bill Murray bringing Rick Smith's here. Rick, how you doing? What's happening up in Norman?
I'm good. Just enjoying the cool weather, the low dew points, and just thinking about our friends down in Florida and Puerto Rico as they get ready for the storm.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Super cleaning up. Bill Murray, bring in our guests. Let's get to it. We got much to say here tonight.
Yeah, we always say if you like a prepared show, you won't like this one. But this one really is the bottom of the preparation scale because I don't even know what our guest tonight does. I know that I was told to have him on the show and he would talk about WEA. And I usually have time to research these things, but my son John fell Friday in PE and had surgery today. And so today we were in the hospital all day. And we got him home and he's happy and wonderful now. But I have no idea, Mike, what you do. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Mike Gerber, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's interesting, though. My boss asks the same question all the time. He says, Mike, what do you do for a living?
Well, we touched on WEA recently quite a bit. And, I was sitting in Beeville, Texas during Hurricane Harvey, and a lobby full of people playing cards and watching their pets at 11:30 as the hurricane, moved inland. And, I continually heard these WEAs going off around the lobby, and there was no real rhyme or reason to it, why they went off at certain times. So there goes one right there probably from somebody. But I was, what we wanted to do was have you on tonight to, talk to us a lot, let us ask you a lot of questions about how it works, where it's going, what the future is for it, and those sort of things. And I think one thing that we always come down to is, just how does it work? What products come and,
right.
how does how do the cell companies determine which ones of us get which alert? So we'll let you kind of take it away, and then we'll kind of jump in with some questions.
Oh, sure. I probably should answer your first question, which was to, I guess, give a little bit of a background about myself. And as of June of this year, I've been in the National Weather Service for 25 years. Actually started in the National Weather Service when Weather Service was modernizing in 1992. National Weather Service in Sterling, Virginia. I was an intern there and did a lot of weather radio and really got into fire weather around that time. That really interested me. So I headed out to the National Weather Service in Boise, Idaho, where I was an incident meteorologist for about 4.5 years or so. Got to go out to wildfires, work with the fire behavior analyst, and really that intersection between weather and wildfire, and of course the humidities and the wind and so forth, or would drive wildfires. So got a chance to do a lot of good stuff there. And actually, back when I was in Sterling, Virginia, if you may remember an old TV show called AM Weather.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So I did about 20 or 30 of those shows. That was back in 1993, 94-ish. Yeah, and then since '99, I've been back here in Silver Spring, Maryland, at a National Weather Service headquarters, and where WEA comes in is about about 2006 or 7, where some folks from NOAA and from FEMA went to Congress and talking about basically an integrated public alert and warning system, and ultimately what came from that was what's called FEMA IPAWS. FEMA's integrated public alert and warning system, which essentially serves as the nation's alert aggregator, if you will. So, it's the sole conduit actually to wireless emergency alerts. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just NOAA's National Weather Service that pushes these alerts to wireless emergency alerts to cell phones, but there's also about 1,000 other non-weather emergency, in other words, emergency management authorities, emergency management agencies all over the country. And I believe all 50 states as well have the capability to push alerts to wireless emergency alerts via FEMA IPAWS. So that's all. And now you may have ever heard of something called CAP, Common Alerting Protocol. Yeah, that's actually alerts in their most atomic parts. And so what we do right now is we kind of do things backwards. We take our traditional teletype style alerts and we basically break them out into their most atomic parts, reassemble them as CAP, and push them to IPAWS so that they can get out to wireless emergency alerts and to many of their National Weather Service partners who use the Common Alerting Protocol and their own mobile applications, desktop applications, alerting services, and so forth. And of course, we're a very information-centric agency, so that's the kind of thing that we're all about. But I've actually got a few slides or a few visuals to show you guys. Maybe that'll we'll throw some things out there and kind of see what sticks. How does that sound to you guys?
Good. That'll be getting us in preparation for the National Weather Association meeting in a couple of weeks. We'll be ready for some slides.
Well, and don't forget, Mike. A lot of people listen, so be very descriptive when you show them.
And Kevin is the authority who makes sure you explain the slides when you tell them about
them. Well, what's interesting is normally I'm presenting this kind of thing at the American Meteorological Society conference or maybe IAEM or something like that, and you only have a few minutes really to crank through this. So it's good to have the opportunity to show you all some of this and this material, and just depends on how geeky you guys want to get as to how deep we want to get into this. But I think listening to some of the pre-show conversation, it sounds like we want to get a little bit geeky here.
It's just geeky.
Peg the geek meter.
Yeah, peg it.
Peg the geek meter. Nice. All right, so let's see. One thing I want to do here is I want to go ahead and I want to be able to share these slides here. And I know there shouldn't there be a little share button?
On the left side over there, you'll hover over it and you'll see a little screen share. The second one down, the green screen with an arrow coming out of it.
Okay.
And then go through a couple gyrations and you can show
There it is. Okay. All right, we've got it now. How's that look? Boom, excellent. So a lot of people ask us, what type of alerts do we push out to wireless emergency alerts. Now, the National Weather Service, we've got, all kinds of watches, warnings, advisories, and so forth. And we got together several years ago, probably about 2011, just before the service rolled out in 2012, with folks from our various regions and our meteorological services folks, and got together and decided what are the most critical alerts? What are the types of alerts to the American people over cell phones? And so we came up with is basically this list here, from tsunamis, tornadoes, extreme wind warning, hurricane, typhoon, storm surge, flash flood, and dust storm warning. And a lot of people say, Mike, what's an extreme wind warning? Well, actually, an extreme wind warning is related to the eye wall of a major hurricane coming ashore. They're exceptionally rare. But we actually issued the extreme wind warning when Harvey came ashore last week. So there's sort of a first there, if you will. And I imagine the National Weather Service would be looking to use that again if indeed we have a similar situation with Irma, coming on shore, or major eye wall making landfall. So we'll kind of see where that goes. Most of the alerts, though, that we push out are of the variety of tornado warnings and flash flood warnings. Going back to 2012, when the service first rolled out, we've transmitted about 30,000 alerts to cell phones. Again, most of them tornadoes and flash floods. And they all, if you've received them before, and I'm sure you have, they all should have text that's very similar to what you see here on the right-hand side. So what we use is sort of this prefabricated format here, or template, where we basically do it in an automated fashion, and we fill in the blanks. So, for example, tornado warning in this area till such and such a time. Take shelter now. Check local media. NWS. Now, we're very fortunate because that NWS is relatively well known. Some studies that were conducted found that the source of the information is one of the most important, if not the most important element in the wireless emergency alert message. We all know from the social science studies and so forth that it's one thing to issue a warning, and it's another thing, of course, for people to take that decisive life-saving action. We're of course proud, and we're happy that many people are aware of what NWS, what National Weather Service is. But we're going to talk a little more. I can talk a little more in a few minutes about where wireless emergency alerts is going, and because we're actually right now limited to only 90 characters in these messages. And any idea, by the way, I'll ask you guys. Let's keep this interesting. Why do you guys think that wireless emergency alerts was originally limited to 90 characters? Anyone care to take me up on it?
Because they were being sent from Brian Peters' Commodore 64.
Exactly.
Had one of those.
Is it got something to do with the restriction of the telephone companies, the wireless companies?
Sort of kind of a restriction thing, but keep going. Any other guesses?
You had wanted 140, but Twitter took that.
No, it wasn't as long as a tweet. What was the minimum lowest common denominator? The minimum
SMS or whatever.
Well, it was a pager.
Yeah.
Paging. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and now I wasn't around when that was established back in 06 and 07, but when they started to discuss what the rules for this would be. But that's what I'm told. I understand that back then they were talking about pagers sort of being that lowest common denominator, if you will, and one of the reasons why it was limited to 90 characters. It also has to do with I believe the amount of characters or data that you could send over basically a packet, a cell packet. So in any case, I thought that a little bit of trivia, whether it's true or not, is at least interesting. In any case, so this is what we've been doing for a while. And when Harvey made landfall, gosh, what are we? We've been doing this now 5 years, pushing the wireless emergency alerts. When Harvey made landfall, over the 2 or 3 days, we activated WEA, I believe 90 times for tornado warnings and 190 times for flash flood warnings. And that was just over the course of a few days. But of course, Harvey really, and certainly an unprecedented, very much unprecedented storm. A couple of interesting things, though, that I want you all to take note of, because you've probably gotten accustomed to just seeing these types of alerts on WEA. There's a couple of new things here, which you may have noticed. And that is, first of all, the storm surge warning. which we are actually pushing it to FEMA IPAWS, but they're not yet going out to the wireless carriers from what we can tell. As we understand, the wireless carriers, while the FCC had approved the use of SSW, the 3-character code for storm surge warning last year, wireless carriers have not quite yet readied their systems to be able to handle that. I don't have a time frame from them on when that's going to be, but definitely something we're looking to get out over wireless emergency alerts, and that's why it says with the double asterisk there, the availability of storm surge warning varies by wireless carrier. And the other one that's really interesting as well is the tornado warning. We used to just say tornado warning in this area. Now, if the National Weather Service Office issues a tornado emergency message, then we're actually going to use special tornado emergency language in the WEA message. So it's actually possible you could get a WEA message twice for the same tornado. It could be the first time where you get the initial tornado warning, and then the follow-up statement, if it includes the tornado emergency language, then you would get a follow-up as well.
So quick question for you, Mike.
Yeah.
So on an SVS, you're only going to reissue it if there is a tornado observed, or the words tornado emergency in the product?
It's actually we trigger on the catastrophic tag, if you're familiar with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and when there's a catastrophic tag, there's a one-to-one relationship. When the forecast office uses that catastrophic tag, it also includes the tornado emergency language in the narrative portion of the warning.
That's good to know. I never understood that. So if you've got a catastrophic tag, it's technically a tornado emergency.
That's yeah, correct.
Okay, good. All right, good.
There you go. So, any questions about this stuff so far? I've got some other.
But so like if you're in a hurricane warning, or that's probably the primary one that's going to be interesting in the next few weeks, because there'll be repeated continues issued on those hurricane warnings in the TCV product,
right?
Local offices and from the Hurricane Center. Will those continuations, extensions, all those things, will they be warned, or just the new?
No, that's an excellent question. Excellent point is that we only activate wireless emergency alerts for the initial warning. So you're only going to essentially get it once. However, that's not to say that you don't get the same hurricane warning a couple of times, because of the way we issue the alerts, the geographic areas for which we warn via the CAT messages, and that combined with the way the wireless carriers use the cell broadcast technology to broadcast the alert, it could be that you also receive the hurricane warning from an adjacent area. And we can talk a little bit about how the cell broadcast stuff works here as well. Happy to do that here in a little bit. So again, don't want folks to think that you're going to get, every time there's a continuation, you're going to get re-alerted. You won't. However, if you haven't yet driven into the area where the warning is in effect, and you haven't gotten a WEA yet, and now let's say you're driving on the interstate and you drive into that area, the cell carriers do periodically rebroadcast the alert. So chances are you're actually going to eventually receive that alert, even if you didn't receive it on the initial broadcast.
Okay, outstanding. All right.
Yeah. So anyway, so enough about that. Let's move on here. So a lot of people ask me, well, how in the heck do you do the geo-targeting? One of the questions we used to always get from people was, oh, is the service following me? Does it somehow know where I am? Is it tracking you? Yeah. No, it's definitely not tracking you. In fact, we have no idea where you are. So what actually happens is they use a technology called cell broadcast, which essentially is a radio broadcast technology, where the idea is if you're mated to a tower or connected to a tower which is broadcasting the WEA message, then you receive it. That's basically the way it works. So the FCC rules were updated last September to require wireless carriers to geo-target by polygon when we provide a polygon, although carriers had already been doing that voluntarily for years, which is a great thing. So the way they do it now, it's very important to understand, and I imagine we get into geo-targeting, you guys are going to ask me some questions about exactly how it's done. Well, a lot of the stuff is proprietary. Wireless carriers, of course, they're for-profit, very competitive industry, and a lot of the information about where the cell towers are, where they broadcast to, so on and so forth, they consider very proprietary information. So we too tend to speak a little bit in generalizations when we talk about how the alerts are broadcast, but I'm going to tell you as much as I can and pretty much as much as I know. So the way the broadcast works is that imagine you've got that warning polygon there right in the middle in the red, and you've got these cell towers inside and adjacent to it. Well, the carriers are usually going to at least broadcast. They're going to at least broadcast from cell towers which are inside the actual warning area, inside that polygon. And sometimes the carrier may also broadcast from towers which are adjacent to the polygon. And so as you can see there may even be cases where they don't have coverage. And maybe you don't get the alert. Or maybe you could be 5, 10, 15 miles is possible, particularly out in rural areas where you're out 15 miles, let's say, outside the actual threat area, and you still receive the alert because you might have what they call a boomer tower, which is broadcasting, what many miles out into the distance. So it's possible you could have what we call underreach, where maybe you're not completely broadcasting to the entire polygon, or maybe you could have overreach, where you're receiving alerts which are somewhat outside. But I think it's fair to say that if you get a wireless emergency alerts, you're either directly in the path or reasonably near or within the path of the event, of the threat. And so this is something that I really haven't shown to a lot of people here. And this is where I'm talking about, well, how geeky do you guys really want to get? And what I've actually done is I pulled this out of a paper that was created by what's called ADIS, the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions. Well, who the heck are they? They're basically the industry group, which created the specification for wireless emergency alerts. And they conducted a feasibility study on improvements to wireless emergency alert cell broadcast geo-targeting. They released this back in December of 2015, and I've got the link there if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty. So again, to give you a better idea as to how the carriers geo-target, and again, this is for illustrative purposes only. In this case, imagine that we're using a circle here, but imagine that's the polygon, because it might as well just be a polygon. And what you're looking at here are these dots here with let's say with the numbers inside. For example, these are, let's say, cell towers, the center of the cell tower broadcast area, and the broadcast area represented here by these octagons. You have all these little broadcast areas from cell towers and all these octagons. And then we have the octagons, and we're subdividing. If you imagine a cell tower, let's say, having sectors, like 3 different sectors here in each polygon. You imagine that a cell tower, first of all, cell towers could have anywhere from, let's say, 1 to, I believe it's 6 antennas on each tower. So you can imagine a broadcast from a cell tower being divided up like slices of a pie, anywhere from, let's say, 1 to 6 slices. So here we're going to imagine that they've got, let's say, 3 slices of a pie per cell tower. And we'll talk a little more about these cell sectors as we get over to the graphic on the right. But in any case, here on the left, this is what I was showing you before, where each of these towers is within the polygon, so it's broadcasting the alert to its broadcast area, and that's the area you see outlined in blue. So you can see pretty much it's covering the alert area, and some folks who are outside in this blue area, who are outside of the red, there's a little bit of overreach or bleed over, as we call it, are also receiving the alert. Any questions on that one so far before I go on to the cell sector stuff?
No. So how do the cell companies feel about this, Mike? Are they behind it? Is it like a pain in their rear end, like passenger trains are to freight railroads, or
Well, I think there's a couple different perspectives of it, and I think we have to understand. First of all, very appreciative of the service they've done. This is an absolute revelation. Hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, we believe, have been saved due to wireless emergency alerts. I mean, we've got countless examples, particularly with the tornado warning. So we really want to thank wireless industry for stepping up to the plate with us. I mean, this is it's a partnership between federal, states, locals, industry. Really something that exudes the National Weather Service's Weather Ready Nation initiative. So something, of course, we're very excited about. But they are, wireless industry, they are for-profit companies, and we certainly understand that. So this is not a moneymaker for them, per se, but I think they recognize the good that we're doing, and I think they too are very proud of the lives that we've been able to save with the service. So this is something that, obviously it costs them money in order to provide the service, but it's not something that can show up on your cell phone bill. In fact, the FCC regulations do not allow that to happen. You're not allowed to pay for the service per se. So, we get, and we do a lot of collaboration with wireless industry. There's something, I apologize for throwing out, all of these acronyms, but I'll throw one at you. The group that does a lot of work, and this is cross industry, government, academia, and so forth, is a group that's tasked by the FCC to make recommendations back to the FCC for improvements to wireless emergency alerts. And that group is called the CISRIC, the Communication Security Reliability Interoperability Council. And they are about to, this is really cool. We did a CISRIC 4 and CISRIC 5 over the last 4 years, and we made a number of recommendations for improvements to WEA. I'll show you those shortly because they're actually going to be coming to fruition. But CISRIC 6, and each of these goes for 2 years, is taking shape now. And over the next year or so, one of their working groups is setting out, and this again is a tasking by the FCC, to do a comprehensive reimagining of emergency alerting. And if you think about, EAS came around in 1997, and we're still using EAS, I can only imagine that this effort might set the stage for emergency alerting, let's say over the next couple of decades. So I'm excited certainly to get involved and be a part of that. It's I think an absolutely a great opportunity. So yeah.
So what happens with NOAA Weather Radio in the long?
Well, that's another thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm glad you raised that. A lot of people say, "Oh, is this intended to replace NOAA Weather Radio or other alerting systems or other things that are put in place by the private sector or the broadcast media and sirens and so on and so forth?" And no, I give a very definitive no to that. This is part of our nation's larger warning network. And I think we've probably all experienced situations where, some alerting systems work better for us than others, just depending on, what's up and running. One of the great things though about wireless emergency alerts is, again, it uses cell broadcast. So that's a point to multi-point communication. It's not point to point where, if 1 million people get the alert simultaneously, all of a sudden it's going to take the networks down. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If the cell networks are congested, but they're still able to broadcast, then the wireless emergency alert will still get out and people will get it quickly, like they have been, because again, it's simply a radio type broadcast. So that's something that's I think particularly important for people to understand. Yeah. Let's see. Want to go over to the cell side. This is where things get a little geekier. So let's go over to our cell sector. I guess you could call it cell sector geo-targeting if you wish. So we're back to our polygon again, right? So how do we tighten up things so that maybe the alert is not broadcast to everybody, not broadcast to the entire cell tower's broadcast footprint? So what actually can be done? Remember, each one of these little boxes here is a sector within the octagon within the cell tower's broadcast area. So the wireless carrier can look at their network topology and say, okay, I'm only going to broadcast from the antennas, which are, let's say, inside the only from the antennas which have coverage inside the actual alert area. So that's why you would see, let's say, B and C getting lit up, but not A getting lit up, because most of A is outside the actual alert area. And so they're able to tighten up the geo-targeting a little bit. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And this is just, again, an illustrative example. There's a lot of proprietary stuff. And I think that's what the wireless industry would tell you, that there are other ways they could do this as well. But this is I think gives a good idea as to how they do it. Yeah.
So basically, though, we doesn't tell them how to do it. They do it how it's best for them, right?
Well, we've talked about this before. I mean, generally, in the National Weather Service, we try to cover, broadcast to those areas which are under the threat. That's what we'd like to see done. But I think what they try to do is they try to stick with the FCC regulations. They try to, broadcast to the best of their ability that they can using cell broadcast technology. It's not going to perfectly match the polygon necessarily, and that's something else we can talk about as well. But we can get some pretty close approximations, especially in larger, more densely populated cities. And the reason I say that is because when you get into these densely populated cities, there's tons and tons of these cell towers. And I imagine it's for efficiency purposes and for management of the networks, that they don't want, people from all over the place being able to connect to a single cell tower and overloading it. So with such a high density population, it's covers a smaller area, if you will.
Right.
So when you get a polygon over a highly populated area, I think it's generally fair to say that you generally have a better broadcast approximation of the polygon itself, versus when you're in rural areas, you might get one of those boomer cell towers, which is broadcasting all the way up the highway, for example. So, and again, I'm speaking in generalities because these networks, in fact, that carriers tell me the networks are dynamic, that things are changing all the time. So just gives you an idea, though. And so I mentioned some of the improvements coming to wireless emergency alerts. And I mentioned the SysRIC before, the SysRIC 4 and the SysRIC 5, and a lot of the work that was done, the recommendations that were made by that combination of the proceedings between the meetings between wireless industry and federal, state governments and academia, established a bunch of recommendations to do exactly what you see on the screen here. And the FCC took those recommendations and they put them into law and said, hey, here's what we're expecting from wireless industry to improve upon the wireless emergency alert service. And they announced these improvements in November 8th of 2016. That's when they were published. So a year from that date, from November of 2016, which would be November 2017, basically URLs and phone numbers are going to be allowed in the WEA messages. Having said that, wireless industry has informed the FCC that they're going to need more time on it. This is all available in public filings to the FCC, but that's basically what they've said. So whether or not it's going to continue to be 1 year or whether or not it gets pushed out another year or so remains to be seen. And another factor is, even if we can put those URLs in the WEA messages, because they're not, first of all, they're not allowed right now. Based on the original WEA rules, if an emergency manager or National Weather Service would have put, or an AMBER, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, if anyone were to put a URL in there, the carrier was not required to carry the message over WEA. But the thing is, now there's no way for you to, let's say, click or tap on a URL within a wireless emergency alert message. So even if we put them in, there isn't really the functionality to enable those links, if you will, at this time. So I myself am working with that group ADIS that I told you about before, that industry standards body, to work with them and identifying how this might roll out into the future. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that and see where that goes. Within 2 years of that November 2016 date, wireless carriers are to support Spanish language WEA. It's not that the carriers are going to produce Spanish language WEA. It's that if an emergency alerting authority decides to create a Spanish WEA message, in addition to the English, they are also required to carry that. Here's the one that has really it's gotten a lot of attention. Here is increasing the maximum WEA message length from 90 to 360 characters for 4G and LTE, 4G LTE and future networks. The older legacy networks could remain at 90, can still are allowed to remain at the 90 characters. And the timeline for this is 2.5 years. So we're looking at sometime in sometime in 2019 figure. And I do believe you're going to need probably a new cell phone. But again, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are in sort of that 2 to 3 year life cycle with their cell phones, where they're refreshing their cell phone, and the wireless emergency alert app need to be updated to be able to handle the 300 and 360 characters. So, and just because we can do 360, I think it's important that, like, we in the National Weather Service and other public alerting authorities are responsible about it. Do you want to push a 360 character message to people and have them reading it while they're driving down the highway? I'm not so sure. But certainly having more than 90 characters gives us better ability to specify, the geographic extent of the threat, or that will be more precise about it, more specific about it, the intensity of it, the impacts, and so forth. So we're really excited about that improvement. And then there's also a new, what they call, normally right now the types of alerts you could receive over WEA would be a presidential alert, which you cannot opt out of. You cannot opt out of those, although one has never been issued before. Hopefully that remains to be the case, because if a presidential alert were issued, we've probably got some kind of massive, horrible national disaster on our hands. But the other types, of course, are the amber alerts, the imminent threat alerts like we issue from NOAA's National Weather Service, and this new alert classification called public safety alert, which is essentially like a public safety message following an emergency alert message, like following a WEA message. So if there were some kind of major emergency, it might be followed up with actionable information, with the kind of actions maybe you should take as a result of that emergency. And that's the kind of thing that the public alert, safety alert is generally intended for. I think it remains to be seen exactly how people are going to use it, but that's the intent, that's the spirit of it. And, I got to tell you, one of the things, having been involved in the service, it's really exciting when we hear the forecasters in the field tell us that this service has really, revolutionized things. Some of my colleagues, we heard from I think it was Barb Watson in State College at the time, who said that she'd been doing storm surveys for over 25 years. And this is actually in February 2016, so kind of a odd time to have tornadoes in Pennsylvania. She says she never heard it all come together as well as this, is told by people in the path with WEA. They got the warning and they immediately took action. And it's just so exciting to see where we've come since the service rolled out in 2012. And we get these kinds of we hear these kinds of stories very often, particularly with the tornado warnings that we push over wireless emergency alerts. And again, like I said, a lot of success stories. But the one thing that I find that's very common across these success stories is that lives are being saved in situations where people would otherwise not have been able to receive the alert. They're getting it in mobile homes. We're saving lives in mobile homes, like the situation there on the bottom of the screen. Here is one where a WEA was activated for a tornado just before a football game was to take place. 350 people sheltered, and the field was destroyed. All the, you can see it looks like the scoreboard has been destroyed here, and you can imagine things, probably debris flying all over the place, and imagine there probably would have been a number of fatalities, or at least many injuries, and not a single injury. We're getting it when people are in church. There was the big event, the outbreak in Illinois in November 2013, and the person officiating the service was up there, and all of a sudden everybody's cell phone started going off. So I guess he kind of figured out he didn't turn off their cell phone for church, right? And I think when he figured out what was going on, they evacuated, and fortunately the church was still intact, but all the buildings around were destroyed, and many of the buildings around were destroyed, and people really felt like the service had saved their lives. My personal favorite, though, is short. It was about a year after wireless emergency alerts rolled out. It's this one right here. This is the WEA, as was actually seen on the cell phone by Kathy Risotto. She's a real hero. She was actually, this is July 1st, 2013. She was managing like a camp, and those big like tennis or like a soccer dome kind of thing, and they had a camp there with 29 kids and 5 counselors. She got the wireless emergency alert on her phone, and I believe this happened to be a tornado warning where we had very little or no lead time. That is, the warning was issued when the tornado was already on the ground. She got the alert quickly, took immediate action. She said as soon as they moved the kids into a sturdier building, that's when adjacent building, that's when the dome was completely destroyed. And what you're looking at here on the right side, this is not the tornado. This is actually the dome flying high above the highway. This is actually a snapshot taken of somebody who was driving on the highway. And a very religious man, because he kept referring to things being holy, the language he used, if you can imagine. Some very extreme language in his video, but yeah, it was just incredible that probably the lives of 29 or maybe 30, 35 people saved as a result of the warning which had been issued by the National Weather Service, and we're just very proud to be able to provide that service. And I just want to make it clear that the credit for these live saves absolutely goes in these tornadoes and flash floods and so forth to our forecast offices. These are the people in the hot seats. These are the people in the hot seat and the radar doing the difficult job of trying to decide what to warn on, what not to warn on. And it's a very stressful job. I've done it myself. It's been a number of years. But they just deserve a ton of, I think, a ton of credit. But that's my favorite story. The other thing too, though, that we find is, and this was actually, it's kind of funny because this event here, this Elmira, New York story from 2012, and we had just rolled out, but we're constantly finding that the first responders will go out, oh my God, a tornado went through, devastation, we're going to find bodies. And then when they don't, they're like, wow, why is that the case? And they find out then that people got the alert on their cell phone and they took action, which is great news. And this is exactly what happened. The first time we saw it happen, Elmira, New York, July 26, 2012, there was a tornado in the Elmira, New York area, hopped, skipped, and jumped for about 10 miles, 2,000 structures damaged. You can see the photo there right behind Barb McNaught-Watson there. She's the one being interviewed. And again, emergency management went out. They truly expected to find bodies. Like, why? This is amazing. There was no injuries, no fatalities. And then when they started interviewing people, they found out that they got this alert on the cell phone, and nobody even really knew what wireless emergency alerts was at the time. We didn't even know how many cell phones had it. Not all iPhones had it. Only certain ones had it. Only certain phones were capable of it. And even at that time, we were just trying to work up lists, working with the carriers to try and figure out what phones were actually capable of it, and whether or not the carriers had even fully rolled out across their network. So this for us was just a revelation. It was tremendous when that story came in. Very good news.
Mike, I have to say though that you got to credit the partnership with the carriers, because one of the things about a warning is it doesn't do anybody any good if it doesn't get out. So it really is a great marriage there of the warning message from the Weather Service and then getting it out to the people who need that message.
Absolutely. And, the wireless carriers in the wireless industry will tell you, this is a best effort service.
Yes.
There's no guarantee that the alert is going to get to you within so many seconds or whatever. But we do monitor our logs. And in many, many cases, the alerts do get to people within a matter of a few seconds. But again, it's not perfect. There are sometimes issues. We found a few cases recently, for example, where people in the San Francisco Bay Area are getting dust storm warning WEA activations for the Phoenix area, and we believe that's actually due. And it's not the overreach that I was talking about earlier, but we believe it actually has something to do with these very small scale. And I'm not a wireless expert, but these small scale like repeaters, what I believe they call femto. FEMTO, is that right?
Yeah.
Femto cells. You guys may know more about that stuff than me, but
I know a little bit, but not much.
Yeah, and so as I understand it, these things can get deployed, but if they don't report their new location back to the carrier's database, yeah, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
We think that tower in San Francisco was really in Phoenix.
Yeah.
So we think that's what's happened, but we kind of know what there's some symptoms, some suggestion when that occurs, where people, let's say in the Bay Area, you won't get everybody in the Bay Area saying, oh, I received one. It'll be sort of more of an isolated kind of event when we get those reports. So again, it's not a perfect service, but we're all working together to do the best we can.
Hey, then let me ask you this question. What's the one thing, Mike, that can go wrong? I have always been recommending a certain warning app or apps for people to have on their phone. What's the point of failure here? What can go wrong with WEA?
Well, it could be in the Weather Service. It could be, it just depends. It depends on, I guess, the nature of an event. For example, there have been situations where we have a system outage, and as a result, we're not creating those CAP messages and pushing them to iPaws, and that's required in order to activate wireless emergency alerts. We try to certainly minimize those types of situations. They're rare, but they have happened before. There's situations where I suppose there could be a situation where, let's say, the cell tower is down and the cell tower is not going to broadcast the alert. But here's something that I really want to go to, and this is exactly what happened in the I'm going to get the name wrong. There was just an incident in Arizona where 9 or 10 people were killed in a swimming hole.
Yep.
Was it the Warm Springs or Cold
right.
Springs? Cold Springs swimming hole?
Yeah.
It was Cold Springs? Okay, yeah.
And flash flood.
Yeah, the flash flood. And so National Weather Service activated WEA for that area, and there's plenty of lead time on it, but there's no cell coverage in that area. So you were asking me before, is this going to replace weather radio and other services? And again, there's a situation where no, it doesn't. We do understand from the emergency manager in that area, he says that yes, if you had a weather radio, he believes there is coverage there and that you could have received the alert. So that's the whole thing. You know, we haven't found the perfect alerting system yet. I wish we did, but we haven't, and that's why I consider all of these things, whether it be wireless emergency alerts, no weather radio, your local TV and news, or sirens, or mobile app, desktop or mobile app, they're all part of the nation's larger warning network. And we know from social science that even if people get it on WEA, or if they get it on weather radio, or they get it on whatever, they still may be looking to other trusted sources, and usually they are, before they take that life-saving action. And that's why it's so important that you get the little -NWS and the wireless emergency alert, and we hope that people continue to see that us as a credible source.
Would you have WEA only on your wife's phone? Do you trust it that much?
I have multiple. She has multiple alerting services. I have multiple on mine as well. Because again, there's multiple types of technologies. This is a cell broadcast, technology, and if the cell tower is down that I'm connected to, then there's a possibility I'm not going to get that alert. On the other hand, maybe my home Wi-Fi is available, and maybe that's still up and running, so I'm still able to get internet, and I can get a message that's pushed to me. Or maybe all of that's down, but the local radio station is up, or the weather radio station is still up and running. And then so I'm able to get an alert there. So again, you've got to have redundancy. Yep,
I totally agree. But I have learned more about WEA tonight than in any other show we've done here. I mean, this because we've never exactly understood how the sausage is made. So you have opened our eyes, Mike. Thank you so much for your time tonight. This has been welcome. Fantastic.
Absolutely. Love it.
Let's say if anybody has a question, could you have an email address or a Twitter account or something where people get in touch with you?
Sure. I'm at mike.gerber@noaa.gov, mike.gerber@noaa.gov.
Okay. Well, Mike, you have stayed way past your 30-minute allotment you've given us here. Thanks for your time tonight. Thanks for the information. It has been marvelous. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mike. We are going to take a quick break. We've got Professor Peters. We have Tony Rice. And then we'll come back with picks of the week and email, and we'll talk about hurricanes a lot. So hang with us as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
Last week, we discussed the primary factors involved in bringing those spectacular fall colors to the trees. So just where can you find the best color? You can find autumn color in parks and woodlands, in the cities, countryside, and mountains. Just about anywhere you find deciduous broadleaf trees. Those are the ones that drop their leaves in the autumn. Nature's autumn palette is painted on oaks, maples, beeches, sweet gums, yellow poplars, dogwoods, hickories, and others. Some neighborhoods may even be planted with special trees that were selected for their autumn color. New England is rightly famous for the spectacular autumn colors in the trees of its mountains and countryside, but the Adirondacks, Appalachians, Smoky Mountains, and Rocky Mountains are also clad with colorful displays. In the east, we can see the reds, oranges, golds, and bronzes of the mixed deciduous woodlands. In the west, we see the bright yellows of aspen stands and larches contrasting with the dark greens of the evergreen conifers. Many of the Forest Service's 100-plus scenic byways were planned with autumn color in mind. In 31 states, you can drive on over 3,000 miles of scenic byways, and almost every one of them offers a beautiful, colorful drive sometime in the autumn. So when might you see the best autumn color? Well, unfortunately, autumn color is not completely predictable, especially in the long term. It generally starts in late September in New England and moves southward, reaching the Smoky Mountains in early November. It also appears about this time in the high elevation mountains of the West. The Forest Service's fall color hotline is 1-800-354-4595 and can provide you with details as the autumn color display progresses. Do you have a question about the weather? You can address that question to question@weatherbrains.com.
So, Brian, did I roll the wrong one?
Yes, sir.
Well, goodness. Is that supposed to be next week's or last week's? Or what
That was
did I
last
do
week's.
wrong here?
That was last week's. This is 607.
Okay. Wow. Well, goodness gracious. Let's see if I can fix that here. Stand by. We'll get our Sorry,
I couldn't get your attention faster.
That's okay. I'm sitting here answering 10 jillion questions here. So, producer JP, we're going to just act like that never happened. So we're going to roll the right one. Then we'll come back with so Tony, then he sent in a 606. That's last week's.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's just do WeatherBrains 101 all over again. And we'll edit this in, and people listening on the podcast will never know I fouled up.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
If you've been following the tropical action over the last couple of weeks, you've probably heard the term ACE. No, that's not referring to a playing card held in a hand by a meteorologist, but it does stand for Accumulated Cyclone Energy Index. The ACE index is the measure of total seasonal tropical activity used by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. It is a wind energy index that is defined as the squares of the maximum sustained surface wind speed in knots, measured every 6 hours for all named storms, while they are at least tropical storm strength. Since the calculation is sensitive to the starting point of the 6-hour intervals, the convention is to use 00, 06, 12, and 18 Z times. Kinetic energy is proportional to the square of velocity, and by adding together the energy per some interval of time, the accumulated energy is found. As the duration of a storm increases, more values are summed, and the ACE also increases, such that longer duration storms may accumulate a larger ACE than more powerful storms of lesser duration. Although ACE is a value proportional to the energy of the system, it is not a direct calculation of energy or the mass of the moved air, and therefore the size of the storm would show up in a real energy calculation. A related quantity is hurricane destruction potential, or HDP, which is ACE but only calculated for the time where the system is a hurricane. ACE is calculated for each storm, and then those ACE values are combined with the total number of named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes in a season to categorize or rank a hurricane season as being above normal, near normal, or below normal. The 1950 to 2000 seasonal average for ACE in the Atlantic Basin is 96. The highest ACE calculated for a single storm was 82 for Hurricane Typhoon Ioki. Hurricane Ivan in the 2004 season had an ACE of 70.4. The 2005 hurricane season in the Atlantic has the highest ACE with 250 in all seasons between 1950 and 2017. ACE is calculated for the basin, so there are values for each season in the Eastern Pacific too. The highest ACE in that basin was 295 in the 1992 Pacific hurricane season. If you have a question about the weather, drop an email to question@weatherbrains.com.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
We are doing this program on Tuesday, September 5th. We have just come through Hurricane Harvey. And as we record this, we are watching Hurricane Irma, which is at Category 5 strength. Bill Murray, you're our weather historian. Give us a little kind of look at Irma in terms of history with hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin.
Well, it's going to be interesting at 10 o'clock because I think the intensity may have diminished just a bit in the last hour or so, or hour and a half. But this hurricane may have hit 190 miles an hour based on an observation that was shortly after 7 o'clock tonight, which would tie it with Hurricane Allen in the Atlantic, if I remember correctly. I was a freshman going into Stanford University in 1980 on the night that Allen was rampaging across the Eastern Caribbean. And when that hurricane went Cat 5 that night, I will never forget sitting up all night listening to my weather radio of all things, because that was the only place you got information. And, when you start talking about hurricanes that are in that intensity with Gilbert, all these other top 10 hurricanes of all time in the Atlantic, this is pretty amazing, especially since I guess this is the first time that's happened outside the Caribbean or the Gulf. Did I hear that correctly today?
Phil Klotzbach. Phil knows all the answers to these questions.
Yeah. Well, tonight I was going
to say the thing about Allen, Bill, that I remember. I was working at the NBC channel here, and back in those days, to access another Weather Service WSR 57 radar site, you had to dial a phone number and use a modem. We talked about that, and I think it could handle maybe 3 concurrent connections, and that was it. So when you dialed the Brownsville, Texas radar number, it was busy. So I sat there and dialing. And I want to say we might have even still had a rotary phone back then. My finger was like red. And the minute we connected, it was like a party. We were screaming. And we got 3, half-degree tilt radar sweeps that went in that Enterprise box we had. And but that was my memories of Allen. It was trying to get that thing on the Brownsville radar. But
my other story from that storm was that you had to go to the Weather Service, which was at 11 West Oxmoor Road here in Birmingham, to really get information. You had to go to the teletype room. They had AFOS, I guess, by then, and we were using it some. But you still lived and died by those teletypes. And I remember going in the room that night, and there was a guy sleeping on the floor in the teletype room, and I'm like, who is this guy, And it was Dr. Keith Blackwell, who was a student then at USA and studying to be a meteorologist, and was a real hurricane expert, and was about to work with Bill Williams at Capital Weather in Mobile. But that's how I met Keith Blackwell that night. He was slumming on the floor of the Weather Service in Birmingham, getting information on Allen as it moved into Brownsville.
I remember he had a little Volkswagen Beetle that he drove. I remember seeing Keith in there all the time. But yeah, so the hurricanes that have had winds of 185 miles per hour in the Atlantic Basin: Labor Day hurricane of 1935, Wilma in 2005.
That's right.
Allen, or not Allen?
Gilbert.
Gilbert was the other one. Yeah, forget. Yeah, the Gilbert I think was the 80s.
Yeah,
sometime in the 80s. But anyway, we'll see. Right, we'll see. But the bottom line is that's the system on the board here. So let's go around the room and pick a landfall point. Now this is like 6 days away. So this just shows just how good we are.
You dropped 2 new guests in for the show, so why don't we introduce them real quick, and we'll get their thoughts.
Okay, go.
Thoughts. We've got Sean Wall with us tonight, James. He's a PhD research meteorologist at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, also a storm chaser, and was on a really cool mission into Hurricane Harvey. And we're also joined by Addison Alford, a PhD student. And I may have left something out, guys. So please, because this was my worst preparation day ever for this show. So if I left something out, I'll expect Rick to correct me or one of you to correct me before Brian puts it in the show notes. But welcome to the show tonight.
Thank you.
Well, we're excited you're here. So now that James has set it up, we want to get your landfall predictions. And I know that's going to be really critical to y'all because you're hoofing it across the country starting tomorrow to find a place to position in front of Hurricane Irma. So we'll be interested to hear what you have to say. So James, take it away.
Okay, so let's just go. Everybody just pick a landfall point. Brian Peters, I'm starting with you because, buddy, I'm putting you on the spot. Go.
Thank you. I'm going to pick Charleston, South Carolina.
South Carolina. Okay. He's going east. Kevin, what you go? Kevin's not. He's doing the show. Rick Smith. And you were muted, sir. There we
I
go.
should have stayed muted because you'll have a better answer. I protest the concept of landfall because we're tracking a dot crossing a coastline. So I
can't weenie out, man. Come on. Where's that dot going to cross that line?
Landfall somewhere right now. So I don't know. I was trying to cheat and look real quick, but I'm unprepared. Come back to
Barbuda. I'm saying Barbuda.
There you go. That's what I say.
Okay.
Kevin, go. United States landfall.
Yeah,
Galveston.
I just don't. Yeah, I think that the story is not told yet. I think we're going to be to Thursday or Friday before we know the influence of that trough.
That's not what I'm asking. Where you landfall go? I mean, forget that.
Did I mention I also was poking through the flight data? And there's
Well, hang on. I got to play Kevin. Flashing. Every time we have a hurricane, Kevin always picks this location.
And dream of Galveston.
That was prior to Ike.
Yeah, I told you I'm not doing that anymore. I felt bad for them after I did that, and they had that terrible one. But I'm looking through some of the flight data, and here's one of them at 8:50. They had a 208 mile an hour wind at 850 millibars, and one of the drop.
That'll make you slap your mama.
Yeah, 181 knots. I don't know.
This is no fun. Nobody wants to play. We're just having fun here. I mean, with this, look, whether weenies listen to this show, this is not Joe Q Public here. We're just having fun.
I feel like it's going to go momentum. If nothing else, will carry it into the extreme eastern Gulf, and then we have to watch and see what the steering currents do, because that trough just hasn't made up its mind, and I think something ugly and unpredictable, or not unpredictable, but unexpected is going to happen. So that's my.
You want to say Biloxi, Mississippi, don't you?
No. I really don't know. I just,
Well, no, nobody knows. Nobody. This is just like we're just shooting. Go.
Well, you know what? It actually brings up an interesting point that I was thinking about the other day, because actually one of the I shouldn't say this out loud, but one of the producers came in here today and was looking over my shoulder, and I was looking at satellite and so on and so forth. And she asked me, she said, "Well, what happens when it gets to Category 6?" And I was like, "Oh boy." And I explained, but she, at one point she said something like, well, they're all saying Category 6. And I think we all know the primary thing that's been, tootling around social media, and there are others with this Cat 6 thing. But I got thinking about it, and there's so much complaining about the fake weather, for lack of a better term, and the panickers and the armchair meteorologists and all this kind of stuff. But then I started to think, okay, let me play devil's advocate, because that's my role in this job. Is that helping? Does it help in create awareness? I mean, we're saying, okay, we need to be on all these platforms. If in fact some of the crazies are getting out there, and we know that people go to multiple sources of information, is this spreading of the Cat 6 story and others helping? Yes or no?
And here, but speaking of fake news, here's a good one I found yesterday.
That's the one. No, that's not the one. This is the guy that Rick's going to go and arrest.
This is the main daily newspaper, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, Star Tribune, verified
but that
account.
came from some guy that Rick found, right, Rick?
Yes, that's the one that Rick Smith found. Yeah. So they found this fake, this doctored up NHC looking graphic that shows a tropical storm moving right up into the Texas coast, and these guys ran this yesterday. This was yesterday afternoon, September 4th at 4:58, about 5 days after they made this map up. How in the world could this happen? And after, they got shouted down on it, that they finally pulled it down. But I still say quality of information is important. And if you make up junk like this, I don't think that helps anybody.
But you certainly can't stop it. And so again, I'm playing devil's advocate, but you are, if a bunch of people are sharing that, and they're sharing the Cat 6 story that went around, is that helpful in some way, shape, or form to create awareness? Because I think a lot of what people are saying is, okay, you get the social media there as sort of a notification system, right? And so does that hurt?
Well, how does it help if you got a fake map that shows a tropical storm going into Texas, which clearly won't happen? I mean,
well, right, but if it's increasing awareness and people then do go and search out multiple sources, and hopefully one of them is credible, then in that role it's helping, right?
That's a big question, though.
I question if they find, if they're going to buy that stuff, they're going to go to nationalenquirer.com and weeklyworldnews.com and all this other crap.
Yeah, I just can't believe the hundreds of thousands of people that like that crap and share it, and I just can't believe their inquiring minds are going to dig very far. I mean, they grab. I have no idea. I don't know how it works, but I don't know the answer to that question.
I had a question today from a very knowledgeable person asking me if what he heard on the Glenn Beck show today about a Category 6 was true.
Oh, brother, please.
And it was kind of like
on here.
So yeah, we got sidetracked going down this rat hole, which is a good rat hole, and it needs to be discussed. And Kevin, there's nothing we can do about this.
Yeah. I'm playing devil's advocate, but then it goes back to my argument of my longtime argument that we helped legitimize those platforms as sources of information.
Well, and I agree. I don't think any good comes of it. I don't think awareness comes of it because the information is just bad. And here's an interesting.
So what you're saying that nobody saw that Cat 6 thing go by and say, "Oh man, there's a big hurricane coming into the Gulf. I better check with James Spann."
I say some did, yes, because I see. Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? And they get all this stuff on there.
So, that's what Laura keeps saying, and all those people is they'll go and check multiple sources of information.
And maybe some do, but I think a lot don't. But here's the big question. So the Huffington Post, which is, it's a politicized site. It's a left-wing site, like Drudge Report is a right-wing thing. But it came out, 7 days ago and said Irma is headed for the Americas. And this may be more than 7 days ago when there's no skill. And we all knew there's a chance, but at that point, 10 days out, you don't know the ultimate destination of this thing. And I declared it irresponsible. And the question is, well, it looks like it is coming for the Americas. So now people are going to start demanding these 10, 15-day forecasts from the Huffington Post. It's probably some political guy that wrote that. Is that good or bad? And that's a devil's advocate question for sure. But
I'm going to stay on this then. Okay, so it's the primary sources. I think we're starting to be in agreement. The primary, not sources, but reasons for social media is to create awareness, and then also there's a great value in the return information, right? You've said 1,000 times, I can't buy a picture from one of the outlying counties unless it comes to me on social media, right? So there's that return. Okay, that's good. But if we're using it as a notification system, if the crazies are out there and going, hey, look what's happening on Cat 6 on day 12, maybe that's creating some awareness. Is that a good thing?
And we'll have to. We got to get our guest on here. We will think about that. And nobody wants to play my game about landfall. Everybody's afraid.
I'll play.
Bill, go.
Yeah, I've got a vested interest in it because we have a hotel in Jacksonville, Florida, and it makes a huge difference. And there are lots of people on edge about it. But I'm leaning toward right now. A path that carries it north of Cuba, but curves it across the lower Keys, and then sharply north and across the Florida Panhandle or the peninsula. So I say Isla Mirada, Port Charlotte, Orlando, and right over my hotel in Jacksonville, Florida on Monday at noon.
So you're going with the European solution then?
Yeah, kind of the Hurricane Donald look.
Now, are we charging Bill for that advertising for his hotel?
Yeah, we're going to send an invoice. This segment brought to you by Bill's Roach Motel.
It needs no help, believe me.
For going with the U.S. landfall, I think if it goes over the lower Keys, that constitutes a landfall in the U.S.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So
Key West. Yeah.
We're sending one of our forecasters to go to the Key West office. He leaves at 6 a.m. to fly down there and hopefully gets there before the airport closes. And so.
Did you ask him if he has his will up to date?
Yeah, we're trying to see if we can get him a pontoon-equipped rental car when he's down there.
So he goes in there. He goes in there under as essential personnel because the evacuation starts tomorrow at 7 p. I think, right?
Yeah, he'll be the only one driving south toward the office. But yeah, I mean they're bringing in a couple of other weather service people and gearing up. So and that office is built like it literally is a fortress designed to withstand pretty much anything. So
the winds are at 185 miles an hour on the 10 o'clock advisory, by the way.
Oh,
so it's still 185. So yeah,
Bill, bring these guests in here. We've had enough foolishness here.
Well, during Hurricane Harvey, I was cowering in a hotel in Beeville, Texas, and I heard you guys were too, Sean and Addison. So you weren't in the Hampton Inn, were you?
We were not.
Holiday
Okay,
Inn.
I didn't think I saw you. So anyway, yeah, at least we're in the same town. But I thought it was really cool on Saturday morning when I saw the forecaster at Corpus Christi put in National Weather Service chat that a team of meteorologists had deployed a balloon into the eye wall, and that's all they said. Nobody, said anything about it or whatever. But I wondered what happened until Kevin sent an email about a Gizmodo article that was written about you guys. We didn't close the gap there on putting two and two together. So, talk about what you did. Who wants to start off?
Go ahead. I'll let you go first. Okay. So the hurricane deployment was a very last minute thing, like most hurricane deployments are. It kind of comes up at the last moment. You got to cancel plans and head down there in a hurry. It was very rushed. We only had 4 people and about 3 vehicles. So there's a lot of, shuffling around between who's driving and trying to get enough sleep. And, you're on the road a lot. And once you get down to the hurricane, you kind of set up and you just go for 24 hours. And Addison was doing a really good job running the radar along with, Dr. Mike Biggerstaff and Gordon Carey from the OU side of things. We had some opportunities where the conditions actually permitted us to take the mobile mesonet, which is a vehicle that we have here at the National Severe Storms Laboratory that measures, surface temperature, pressure, wind speed, wind direction, those kinds of things. We were actually able to drive it around in the hurricane on the western side and take surface observations while they were doing dual Doppler scans of, the western precip shield and the western edge of the eye wall and things like that, which hasn't really been done before. On top of that, we do have the capability to launch mobile soundings. And I launched one by myself pretty early on in one of the outer rain bands, and then Addison helped me a little bit later on in the early evening to launch the second sounding. And then as the eye was actually approaching Refrago, I think is how you say it, Texas, which is near Woodsboro, we actually drove up and got in position for the eye, which was coming into that area, and were able to launch what I believe is the first eye wall sounding, at least the first eye wall up sounding. There have been drop sondes over the ocean, but those are not done over land. The hurricane hunters don't fly over land. The Global Hawk doesn't fly over land.
So, Sean, I have kind of a wise guy question, but it's actually based in some curiosity. In launching that one in the eye wall, we've all kind of laughed. We see a picture of somebody launching in windy conditions, and it skips once or twice on the ground. Did it stay on the ground for a half a mile, or what was that experience?
It was definitely probably the most challenging launch that I've ever had, and I've launched a fair number of balloons, both big and small. We had to take shelter behind the vehicle, behind the truck that we have to actually fill the balloon. It's dark. There's no power, so we have no idea what the surrounding area looks like. When we let it go, it was just kind of watching it disappear into the darkness and hoping we didn't see it hang something. That's about the best you can do in that environment.
Sean, I think the sounding that was at risk for actually going on the ground was actually the second one we launched, right? The first one I helped you with. Because those winds were actually, I think, slightly stronger.
They were. Once we made it into the eye, it was bouncing back and forth between calm and probably 50-mile-an-hour winds. But the second launch that we did probably had 60-mile-an-hour winds sustained at the surface. So once you're in the eye, it's actually a lot easier to do the launch, if that at all makes sense.
Yeah. What other, run down the equipment you had with you? You took a radar, but what else?
We had, from OU had the mobile radar, which was the SmartR program. It's their SR2 radar truck. We had just kind of a passenger vehicle for luggage and spare equipment, things like that. And then we have our mobile mesonet, which is an NSSL vehicle. And
so when the balloon went up, you were looking at the data coming from it live?
Yeah. We can watch the data in real time. Obviously, it moved away from us very, very quickly. And one of the things that we were doing is, we were watching the radar data, and we knew where we were, and we knew where the balloon was. And we were kind of tracking its location in real time. And I remember looking at Addison at several points throughout its flight, just expressing utter disbelief that not only had we actually launched it, first off, but that it was following the interior edge of the eye wall, doing a complete circle. We sat there for about 30 or 40 minutes, and the balloon actually came right back over the truck about 30 minutes later.
Wow.
We didn't move
At what altitude by that time?
I think it was at about 5 or 6 kilometers at that point. It
10
didn't
feet.
have a very high rise rate. And the winds that we saw weren't excessive because it wasn't in the actual eye wall itself where you have the strongest winds. It was on the outside edge, on the inside edge. So it just kind of rocketed around the inside. And what I remember seeing was watching the wind profile develop. And you could watch calculations in real time of like storm relative felicity, for example, which is what we look at for severe weather days. And I think all of us are used to looking at values. You know, if you see a severe weather day with a value of 500 meters squared per second squared, 0 to 3 storm relative felicity, you're thinking, you know, okay, this is going to be a big day. We're going to have, you know, a potential big severe weather outbreak. And we were seeing values approaching negative 1,800, 0 to 3.
Whoa!
Which was just astronomical, and it was negative. And, you know, we're sitting there, we're watching it, and, you know, it makes sense when you look at the wind profile, but when you actually stop and think about how we calculate shear on a sounding, it doesn't apply in a hurricane because what we treat soundings are as vertical profiles. And that's not a vertical profile in that situation. It's actually moving very, very far, very quickly, horizontally. So it changes the way you think about things. And we'd never had a sounding to really make us question that. And that was the first time that we saw that.
So does instability play a role at all in what you see there? Is there much instability? I know you saw some amazing precipitable water numbers, but
yeah, the instability was pretty low. I mean, it's a pretty saturated environment, and when you get down to environments like that, it's very, very sensitive to what your surface values are. So there's probably a lot of cleanup that I can do on that sounding to kind of get a more representative profile. There wasn't much, maybe 200 joules per kilogram. But what was really impressive and what got a lot of attention on Twitter as an example was the precipitable water value, which came in at a value of 3.26, which at this point in time, I believe is a record. Looking through the SPC climatology, the highest I can find is 3.13 out of a sounding site in the Florida Keys somewhere. Values of 3 are extremely rare. There were only probably 5 or 6 that I could find out of the entire SPC climatology. So seeing a value of 3.25 is unheard of.
That 3.13 was actually in another hurricane, right?
I believe so. I haven't tracked down the exact date yet, but it was well away from anything around it. So I believe it was.
So Addison, I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I was just going to throw something in real quick from the Weather Service perspective. You know, frequently we talk about a disconnect between the researchers and the operational forecasters and how can we work together better. I think what Sean and Addison are doing both in this event, and we worked with Sean and his teams on some other projects back during the spring where he was launching soundings into the updrafts of supercells. You may remember we talked about that in earlier episodes back in the spring. But Sean, you're actually sharing this information in real time. I mean, you're tweeting information and tagging the appropriate Weather Service office. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And I can't tell you how helpful that is for an operational forecaster to get that data. So that's, to me, that's something cool that social media has opened up, is just another channel for us to communicate. And talk a little bit about what your experience has been with that.
It's definitely been something that, 5 or 10 years ago, you couldn't do that. You couldn't take a sounding and then get it out to the Weather Service, across the board. And that might be 3 or 4 different Weather Service offices that are watching it, and get it to the Storm Prediction Center and, get it to a large team of people that can utilize that data. And the ability to do that now is paying dividends. And I didn't even know that the Weather Service office at Corpus even saw the sounding. I tagged them in it, but I figured they had their hands full and, never even noticed that it was up. I found out later, obviously, that was incorrect, that they did see it, and they mentioned it in some of their discussions. And that's part of why we do that, and that's part of why we put it out there, is because we are able to provide data in areas that the Weather Service doesn't necessarily have access to data. Their sounding network is limited. They can only launch so many soundings a day. Inevitably, when you put a stationary site, the weather goes around it. So we can drive to where the weather is. In this case, we can, drive to the hurricane and put up a sounding that they can use immediately. And, a lot of times on big days, I'll tweet out pictures as it's going up so that they can see, exactly what it's doing and use that in their decision making, which is a tool that I don't think existed, years ago. And it's been extremely helpful. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from different forecast offices that really appreciate it. So any time like that we're out doing those sorts of things, I'm happy to help.
Well, we sure do appreciate it, and I've seen Sean launch a lot of balloons, but normally it's on a sunny, bright day in November, and he's surrounded by children at the National Weather Festival. So
those are fun, but this is fun in a different way.
A whole different world, yeah.
Hey, Sean, this is Brian over in Birmingham. I'm just curious. I was in Hurricane Allen at Brownsville, and we tried to launch balloons, and we're sorely unsuccessful in it. I'm really curious about how you're able to get this thing inflated and launched. You said just in the shelter of the van or the vehicle?
Yeah, so the vehicle that we have is this one is a Dodge Ram 1500. So it's got a camper shell in the back. It's a decent size, but we actually have a launch tube that we can fill the balloon in, and thankfully Addison was there because there was no way I was doing this by myself.
I pretty much laid on top of the balloon while he was filling it.
Probably nearly took off, Addison.
So we're not standing there, trying to hold just the neck of the balloon and having it bounce around and hit Addison in the face.
Yeah, that's my first image is you're trying to hold this thing.
No, so we've got a rack in the back of the truck that actually slides out, and we carry helium tanks with us, so we can literally pull over on the side of the road, and on a normal day, I can have a sounding up in the air in about 2 to 3 minutes.
What size balloon are you using?
These are anywhere between 200 and 300 gram balloons.
Okay, so they're a little bit smaller than the standard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, because if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't the Weather Service use 1,000 gram?
Rick would probably be better able to answer that, but I don't think they're that big. Those are pretty big balloons.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're smaller than that, but we keep changing systems, and I don't remember.
Did you guys fear for your safety at any time during this?
No, and that was something that I did want to stress with this, and that's part of the reason, aside from Addison being able to help me do this, I needed somebody else with me as that kind of reality check to look at the conditions as we're driving along and make sure that at no point we were in danger, no point were we concerned about our safety or anybody else's safety or the vehicle's safety. It's definitely a kind of a calculated risk. There's a lot that goes into that decision, and it's something that you have to just constantly monitor. There's not a dull moment when you're going through the eye of a hurricane and trying to launch a sounding and trying to get that data off. It's stressful, and there's a lot of considerations that have to go into it. But no, we were never concerned at all.
So what were some
I feel
of
like you guys are.
I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask Addison, what are some of the parameters you were following to make sure that you kept you and your team in safety?
Well, when I'll never forget when Sean and I were driving through, trying to drive through the eye wall to get on the interior edge of the eye. I was watching just radar scope. Luckily, the cell service was still working, and saw a strong region of radial shear moving cyclonically around the eye wall. And I just told him to stop because you don't know if that little area is going to have gust of 110, 120 miles per hour. So as I was just trying to feed Sean some information and discuss it with him, we were really trying to be careful as we made our way from the radar site out on US 77 between it was near Woodsboro, and then we went to I can never pronounce the name of whatever town that was. But it was only a 10-mile drive or so, but it took us, 30 minutes to get over there, I think?
Yeah, at least.
Wow. So you guys have all this data. What are the first couple of things you're going to do with it? What are you looking for?
So from a radar perspective, from the smart radar deployment that we did, what our primary focus was in precipitation extrema. Now, of course, everyone will remember this event as being so significant in Houston, but we were trying to look at the subcirculations in Harvey that lead to local extrema and precipitation. So from a radar perspective, we absolutely nailed that part of the deployment. One of the things that we had Sean do while we were sampling as Harvey as it was making landfall is we had him do a transect, and he got temperature and wind speed measurements in a wave that was moving off of the eye wall. And that not only accounted for a local precipitation extrema, but it also accounted for a wind extrema that was measured at the surface by Sean.
And then from the balloon, what are the first couple things?
I mean,
Or
from a
balloons,
basic sense, there's kind of that wow factor. You know, seeing high values like the precipitable water, that's certainly neat. It's never really been seen before. It's never been done before. But one of the interesting things that I think is really going to come out of this is that we don't have a whole lot of profiles over land, and being able to compare profiles, you know, inside the eye or inside the eye wall to those same profiles that the hurricane hunters were getting over the open ocean, and what sort of changes we see as that system makes landfall. We don't really have any observations of that. We don't even know what questions to start asking because we don't have enough data to even know what we don't know. Comparing it back to models, you know, the precipitable water value was, as far as I know, the highest value observed, at least in the CONUS, but models very regularly predict that. I saw a GFS forecast the other day of Irma as it made landfall in Florida, and it had a value of 3.5 in the eye, which is an incredibly high amount, but we've never verified it before. And having soundings where we can actually start to dig into that, and we can start to say, like, okay, the models are actually doing a reasonable job on this, or maybe they aren't, and we need to adjust some things. The only way that we can make those adjustments and improve the forecast and improve the way that models handle it and improve the way that they handle that transition from, you know, open, warm ocean water to making landfall, and how that deterioration process works is by doing research like this, is by making profiles in areas that we don't have data. And that's where a lot of this stuff is going to help.
It's kind of motivating you then to go and do more, I guess.
It is. You know, when you get data like this, you know, your first reaction is, wow, you know, I'm super excited. I need to go home and I need to publish this. And we're certainly working on that. But it also starts raising questions. Was this a one-time event? Is this something that's repeatable in a lot of hurricanes? Is it there in every hurricane? You know, those are all questions that you start to ask yourself. And only by going out and repeating those observations in different storms and different locations do you start to get at those answers.
Really cool stuff and brave stuff. I've got to go do a show. My parting question, and then I'll go, Bill, is did you see Jeff Petrosky fly by at any point in time? Thanks, you guys. Nice work.
Or Mark Sudduth float by, maybe. Addison, a question for you. I mean, did you see it features in the eye that we saw it from time to time, radar, and some folks said, well, maybe that's birds. Did y'all see those sort of things on your dual Doppler, or could you explain those sort of features?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, a great example is if you go look at some of the GOES imagery from Irma today, earlier this morning, you'll see these same kinds of structures that are rotating around in the eye, where you get these asymmetries directly in the eye and in the eye wall. And we were easily seeing that from our smart radar perspective and on the 88D. So no, it was not birds that you were seeing there. But one of the coolest things, and this is a pitch for the Center for Severe Weather Research, CSWR, Dr. Josh Warman, they had Dow 8 out there, and they were actually in the eye as it was moving onshore. And once they actually could regain antenna control, because they lost their radar antenna for, I think, a period of 30 minutes to an hour just because of the strong winds. They could not rotate the dish. But they actually were able to sample these in really, really high resolution as these vortices were moving around the eye wall.
That is really cool. And were you close enough to capture any of the tornadoes on the eastern side of the hurricane?
No, I don't think we got there early enough to get any of the tornadoes in the outer bands. And then the ones on Saturday, we were sleeping in the hotel.
We say sleep is for sissies here on WeatherBrains.
Okay, you try running a mobile radar for 24 hours.
I tried running a hotel for 24, and it was hard, so I understand. Yeah. Did you catch the attention of any of the local law enforcement folks at any point? Did they say anything or come up to ask you what you were doing?
When we were scouting sites for the radar, because you can't just put a mobile radar anywhere. You've got to be in a flat area, no trees around. When we were scouting sites, we did have one highway patrol that was just making sure we weren't broken down, but they saw we weren't and just moved on.
So you released soundings into the eye wall, any into the eye?
We did not get one into the dead center of the eye where we were kind of stationed in Refuego. We were on the western edge of that eye wall, and it was very clear that we were going to remain on that kind of western edge boundary. So we were never going to be in a position where we could get further into like the center of the eye. The only previous sounding into a hurricane eye that I am aware of right now was Hurricane, I believe, Gloria in 1985. There was a sounding out of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, that actually did launch right into the, as far as I can tell, the dead center of the eye. And it was actually a very benign sounding. It's very calm winds. They're just easterly for a while, then it goes calm, and then it goes to westerly. Like, you look at the sounding and you don't think it's that incredible, and then you start looking at precipitable water and where it was, and then it starts to tell a little bit of a different story. But where we were, no, we weren't going to get into the eye center, and I can only track one balloon at a time. So when we let one go, we're stuck until it finishes its ascent, unless I decide it's not going to work, and then I can turn it off and start another one.
Well, now an instrument packet showed up at the Birmingham WSFO, or I guess that may be an old term right there, at the Birmingham office a week or so ago. They said, well, this is not one of the ones we launched. This is the one y'all launched, is it? It made it all the way to Birmingham somehow.
It's possible. I mean, once they go up, they move out of our site, and I stop watching it at some point. So I kind of have no idea where they go. But I've seen them go pretty long distances before.
Well, I'm fascinated tonight looking at the plane. The dew point in the eye is 45 Fahrenheit right now, and that's probably at roughly 8,000 feet, something like that. Does that same dew point translate all the way to the surface? Is it that low all the way to the surface in a strong hurricane like this?
I think in our case, it was extremely moist. I mean, it was basically like 100% humidity at the surface. I think the RH value was 98%, if I remember correctly. So in our case, no, it was very, very humid at the surface. The dew point was very high. It also didn't change a whole lot for us, at least on the western side of the hurricane structure. It was actually pretty uniform throughout most of the event. Now, whether you start to see values that start to get away from that saturation point as you move further into the eye center, I don't know. We weren't there. I don't have observations like that. That's where looking at data for like the Texas Tech stick nets that they had deployed out there might show some changes like that, because they had a few that went through the eye. CSWR's got a couple of mobile mesonets that they were using, and they might have some observations like that. But it's an interesting question. How much does it change? And knowing information like that plays a role in how the hurricane progresses as it moves on shore, which these are all questions that we need to answer.
And I might have asked that wrong, Sean. I meant in the eye, not in the eye wall, obviously, because that would be a different situation, I guess. But and that temperature increase inside the eye is fascinating too, because inside Hurricane Irma tonight, the jump from inside from outside the eye to inside the eye is phenomenal.
Yeah.
The temperature rise, so that's pretty fascinating. Are either of you guys real familiar with hurricane eye wall replacement cycles? How that works and how we might be going through that right now?
I guess between the two of us, I'm the one that's more familiar, but I'm still a student, so keep that in mind.
Well, you're still a long way ahead of us, Addison. Kind of explain your understanding of what's happening when that occurs.
Yeah, so we're really not sure how eye wall replacement actually happens. But what we do know is that initially you start to get some sort of convection that's exterior to the original eye. And then that begins creating another annulus of convection that's around the inner eye wall. Eventually that kind of becomes the dominant eye wall and chokes off the inner eye, and that dies. And eventually that usually contracts, and the hurricane then strengthens after that. There are several hypotheses for why that occurs. A lot of it is from a modeling perspective. So we don't have very high resolution observations or continuous observations out over the open ocean while these things are actually happening. And that's kind of where some of our research can come in. So the smart radars have done, I think Mike told me about 12 deployments now on landfalling hurricanes. And some of the deployments have been completely over land where we can retrieve three-dimensional winds. Some are over the open ocean. And some of these processes can be captured, but it's a very difficult thing to capture continuously because the P3 can only fly for so long. With things like the Global Hawk now that can fly continuously for about 24 hours, we might start to get a little more physical insight as to why this process occurs.
Wow, that's fascinating. Rick Smith, the Weather Service offices over the middle of the country have been doing 6-hourly soundings, I think. Were y'all part of that process?
Yeah, we are. They started out with a bunch of offices in the northern and central plains, which when you looked at a map didn't make a lot of sense to people. But really the trough, the movement of that trough and what it does is obviously key to what Irma does. And they are going to be adding a whole bunch more offices tomorrow, starting at 18Z. There's going to be a whole new list of offices, including a bunch on the eastern part of the U.S. will be added to that 4 times a day weather balloon list.
So Rick, you know these guys. You were super enough to get them on the show tonight because we have to thank you for making that happen. Any other questions or comments you want to talk about before we move on to Irma?
Yeah, that was going to be where I was going. Is we kind of got to chat with Sean a little bit today in the hallway and understand you're already looking for the next data set in Irma. So what's going on with that? What are your plans and where are you headed?
Yeah, the opportunities of major landfalling hurricanes don't come along very often. So, unfortunately, you kind of have to take them when they come. As a side note, we're going to be driving for the next probably 2.5 days across the eastern half of this country. So if you want any additional soundings along the way to modify your network, just let me know. You can launch them anywhere you want to. But I think the plan right now is, we're looking at South Florida is kind of the most likely target. And obviously that's very open to change. We're going to leave tomorrow morning because it's a long drive down there. I mean, Miami, if we have to go that far, is 22 hours from Norman. So,
and that's in a regular vehicle. That's not in a mobile radar.
Yeah. So it takes us a while. We're not exactly the most nimble team to get down there. So we have to make this decision, unfortunately, now and alter it as we go. And that might mean driving around in circles. That might mean getting halfway there and turning around and coming home because it just decides to go somewhere we can't reach. These are all questions that we don't know the answers to, and unfortunately we just don't until we're usually already there. But yeah, we saw this kind of coming a couple days ago, and there was some light discussion about it, and if it was going to make landfall and if it was going to be strong, and would we want to go and things like that. And like most things, like Harvey, it kind of came together more or less today was when the real discussion started. And when you decide to go, you just start packing and put everything together and hit the road.
So if you come through Birmingham, Alabama, we'll expect you to stop for barbecue, guys.
Okay.
So if let's kind of turn it into a little discussion about what you think. You've looked at a lot of data today, and we've looked at a lot of data. So do you guys? I mean, you may not. Obviously, none of us know where it's going to go, even though we were kidding around making guesses a few minutes ago, and some of us have an idea for our preparation of our assets wherever they are. But do you guys have some thoughts on the hurricane tonight that you can kind of share with the audience that might be listening live, to what you're seeing happening, so they can kind of follow along with your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important for everyone to remember is don't get caught up in every single run. Don't get caught up on where the spaghetti plots are going every single run. We're all meteorologists here, and a lot of people that are listening are meteorologists, and we need to use our intuition. What is going on synoptically? So a lot of folks have mentioned that, okay, where's the trough going to go? What are the positions of the high, the Bermuda high versus the high that'll form eventually over the eastern half of the U.S.? And once we can kind of diagnose that, then we might actually have a better idea of where it's going. Unfortunately, the GFS and the European models are kind of diverging on both solutions. The high is pushing it farther south, and the ECM, I just looked at I guess the 12Z is the one that's still out, but the 12Z high was a little bit stronger, thus pushing it farther south. But I really think people need to stop getting focused on all the spaghetti models and really start looking at this from a synoptic perspective.
John, you want to add anything to that?
Addison's a better hurricane forecaster than I am. I usually just kind of go along for the ride as far as the forecasting standpoint goes. I got a lot of friends that look at hurricanes a lot more than I do. I think it's been interesting to watch the trends. Pretty early on, it throw darts at a board. That's about as accurate as it was. And in the last couple of days, I think we've seen it kind of converge on that tip of southern Florida, which is, if the intensity forecast hold, that's bad news for anybody in southern Florida. But the problem with hurricanes is that a 20-mile shift, which is really not that much, but 20 miles can make the difference between you seeing tropical storm force winds and you seeing the equivalent of an EF2, EF3 tornado level winds. And that's a level of sensitivity that we can't see this many days out. And, the hurricane landfall is not until Saturday right now. It might get pushed back to Sunday. There's no telling how far it's going to travel in the next couple of days and when that steering current's going to kick in and when it makes that northward turn, if it even makes that. So I think Addison's right. I think it's important to kind of, take a step back and not get so fixated. And everybody has their own favorite model that they like to look at. And I'm certainly guilty of it on severe weather days. A lot of us have forecast bias where we have an idea in our head of what we think is going to happen and we choose the model that agrees with our preconceived notions. And I the same thing's going on here. So I think Addison's right. I think it's important to kind of step back and just look at the larger picture and wait until it gets closer. But you do need to start preparing now. Mm-hmm. You can't wait until the day before to decide hey, I live in the Florida Keys, maybe I should leave. At that point, it's too late. So it's kind of a risk reward type thing. And if you're looking at these sorts of scenarios and you're worried about the location that you live in, get out. There's no reason to stay there.
Yeah, we actually had an employee in Beeville, Texas quit today because they said we can't take the hurricanes. I was like, we haven't had a hurricane since 1970, or a major hurricane there. But that one was enough for them. And after a long night of that moaning sound you probably heard in your hotel in Beeville like I did, I could see where somebody who was not, favorably inclined toward these things would want to get the heck out of Dodge. Any thoughts on the intensification process today? Anything you saw? The Hurricane Center just said it was, the satellite view is quite spectacular. I mean, we're all talking in superlatives about this hurricane today. Anything y'all observed today that was interesting?
I think one thing that I might mention, we're all meteorologists that usually watch the show, and most of us at this point are fully aware of Ghost 16 and just the absolutely incredible views that we're getting. And the best comparison I can make, I've actually been thinking about this the last couple of days, is that this is similar to when we shifted to dual pole. We were seeing data in storms that we've never really seen before. And with the new satellite, we're seeing observations of this hurricane on timescales that we've never noticed. We're still seeing things now for the first time that have probably been going on before. We've just never gotten to look at it. So I think we need to take a lot of those observations with a grain of salt. And it is incredible. And there's a lot of clarity that we've never had before. That's kind of my thought on looking at stuff. This is a very strong hurricane. This is not one that I would take lightly by any means. And there's a lot of warm water between here and the Florida coast. And that concerns me as far as the intensity goes. But there's also a lot of hurricane dynamics that we just don't understand. And a lot of land masses with mountains on them that could knock this thing down 2 or 3 categories, hopefully. Addison?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on what Sean said, I think Ghost 16 has been, this season, we've really gotten a nice taste for what it can do. And the mesovortices that I was looking at this morning in the 30-second imagery were just stunning. But being able to compare those to previous data sets like Harvey, you have another major hurricane that's making landfall. How often are those actually apparent in the eye? How long are they actually surviving? It was a little more difficult to see in the 15-minute imagery or 30-minute imagery, but now with these high-resolution observations and the 1 kilometer visible, I mean, it's incredible. So, guys, how can we follow what you'll be doing over the next few days? Is there any way we can keep up with you, a blog or anything? You can follow the Smart Radar Twitter. It's at OU_SRS. so OUSRs. That's our official Twitter for the Smart Radar. And then, of course, you can follow my personal Twitter. It's just at Addison Alford. And Sean, I'll let you pitch in here too.
My weather Twitter is my personal account, but I kind of use it in these situations to, you know, as Rick mentioned earlier, to push out a lot of this data, to push out, you know, anything that we see interesting on the mobile mesonet or soundings as we get them, things like that. I send that out not only so that it reaches, you know, the broader audience, but also it's an easy way to get it out to the Weather Service and Storm Prediction Center and NSSL and things like that. So I believe, you know, NSSL will obviously be watching and giving updates whenever they can. I'll be giving updates on my Twitter, which is at MesoNetMan. That's probably the easiest way. A lot of my posts I'll just put on Twitter just because it goes to every other social media platform I have. So it's very easy, and it's just, you know, one spot, and it's an easy way to, you know, not only get that information out there, but also to let, you know, friends and family know, like, yes, I'm okay. Like, we still have cell service. I'm, you know, still doing work, and, you know, getting that kind of stuff out there. So Twitter's probably the easiest way.
So I have to point out our wonderful Aubrey Urbanowitz is kind of not only in the dark tonight, but has no voice. So she is not able to speak to us because she has laryngitis. She's missed 2 evenings of work, and we want to get her voice back really soon. So Aubrey, we're thinking about you up there. Hurry up and get well. So I guess she doesn't have a pick of the week for us. This might be a good place. We didn't warn you, Sean or Addison, that you had to have a pick of the week, and I think you organically can come up with something that will amaze us. But I'll start around the room with Rick Smith and then get his pick of the week.
Well, I picked kind of an oldie but a goodie. It's a good standby, and as more and more people get interested in the weather and hurricanes, there's a really good frequently asked questions list on the Hurricane Center website. So that's my pick of the week. You could spend hours in there going through that. Just some really fascinating trivia and information and answers to questions a lot of people may have after we've had these 2 back-to-back big storms.
Outstanding. Anything else you want to add or comments for the discussion, Rick?
I don't think so. We appreciate the work that Sean and Addison and the whole team have done and will be doing, and wish you guys safe travels, and thanks for being on. And again, we're just thinking about all the Weather Service and TV meteorologists and emergency managers, public safety, everybody out there getting ready. I know there's a lot of work going on, and you know, it's hopefully we'll join back up here next week and see what happened.
It will be very interesting, that's for sure. Kevin Selly, do you have the opportunity to give a pick of the week? No, he's going to whisper. I think that means that he can't talk to us, so or something. I'm not quite sure what that means. It's like a Walter Cronkite moment or something. So, all right, well, my pick of the week is tropicalatlantic.com. It's an oldie but a goodie. I love their recon page, and it's a great place. And I bet Addison can give me a better pick than that one.
I would go for the discussion page on the NHC website. So if you go to nhc.gov and pick the storm, currently Irma, of course, you can click on the little discussion link at the top, and that has got, you scroll down all the way to the bottom, that one has generally 4 bullet points of the absolute information you need to know for Irma and what the Hurricane Center is currently thinking. So that's my pick of the week.
That's an outstanding one. Those discussions are amazing. I can remember when those discussions said for intra-government use only. And I wonder, Rick Smith, do you remember those days?
Yes, and I long for those. Wish those days were back at times.
Well, you know, Rick, that's an important point. I just thought about that because this was much easier when we weren't dealing with, you know, 10 million people looking at 3,000 different model runs.
Yeah, everybody sees
having
everything.
An opinion.
Yeah,
I feel so much less certain now than I did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, usually you didn't. Nobody knew all this was going. I mean, this has been going on with meteorologists. Of course, we have more models now and more data to look at. But yeah, so it's. I mean, in the end, it's good. I mean, I like that people have the information. The people that are passionate about it can learn more about it and get into it. It's just when the small handful do stupid things that ruin it for everybody else. But yeah, it's hadn't been that long ago where this stuff was not publicly available. So.
Well, I have to give a shout out for the National Weather Association. The annual meeting will be held in Garden Grove, California, Anaheim, and our big Weather Fest on Saturday the 16th. Wish you guys could be there. That would be a ton of fun if we could have you there. But big event, 10 to 4 at the Discovery Cube OC in Santa Ana. About 25 exhibitors, a really cool stage show with Nick Walker from the Weather Channel, and a really cool young meteorologist training program with Donna Lee from Planet Now, and the folks from the National Weather Service in San Diego to be the Ward's floodplain model. Lots of cool things there. It's going to be a fun day, and admission into the Cube gets you into the Weather Fest, and it's going to be a huge event. And I want to see you guys next year at the Weather Ready Fest. That'll be on the opening Saturday. I'm excited because the OU Weather Friends are going to be at Weather Fest this time, but hopefully you guys can be there next year with the Smart Radar and some other cool things when we light in St. Louis in late August next year. So anything else we got to add? Sean, your pick of the week.
Oh, put me on the spot. I will actually take a step back and say the local weather service offices, because out of everybody that watches this, I mean, the National Hurricane Center does a fantastic job. SPC does a fantastic job, but the weather service offices are tuned in to their local environment, and they know more than anybody else what the impacts of a storm system like this is going to have in their region. And they are by far and away like the best source to get information about, you know, how severe it's going to be. What do I need to be worried about? They know where there's going to be flooding. I mean, they know those sorts of details that when you're used to looking on a national scale, you don't, because it's too much information to kind of keep track of. So I would say the local weather service offices.
Outstanding. So I guess weather service people are being deployed all over the hurricane impact zone potentially, as you mentioned earlier, Rick.
Yeah, there's people going to the Hurricane Center to act as a liaison between the Hurricane Center and the local offices and emergency managers. There's people going to the Key West office, maybe Miami, Melbourne, Jacksonville, Tampa. I mean, this is going to affect a lot of offices. And we talked last week about the service backup procedure, where if a weather service office were to go down, who would back them up? We're in a situation in Florida where a lot of the offices in Florida could be impacted. So we're looking at other ways to provide that service backup functionality. So there's a lot of work going on to get ready for this. There has been for a long time, and so yeah, there's people moving, resources moving, equipment moving, and people getting ready all over the weather service, and hopefully people out in the communities are getting ready too.
Well, let's hope so. It certainly will be an amazing 7 days at least, or maybe more than that as this thing goes up the East Coast. So, well, I guess with nothing else to add to the discussion tonight, which has been tremendous and robust and superb, and appreciate you, Addison, appreciate you, Sean, joining us. Thank you, Rick, for getting the guys on the show. And we're going to be watching what they do with a lot of interest this coming week. But till next week, when we'll preview the NWA annual meeting, and we'll talk to a meteorologist who was actually in Harvey in Houston, continuing to think about those folks there, and no telling what will come up between now and then. I'm Bill Murray saying this is WeatherBrains, the weekly netcast that's all about weather. We do this on Monday nights usually. We skipped a night because of Labor Day this week and had it on Tuesday, but you can, of course, get the show anywhere you consume your local podcast. And we love questions. We love guest comments. WeatherBrains.com will get to all of us, including the esteemed Dr. John Scala, who's on sabbatical. And we tend to love those questions. We love those guest suggestions, and we take advantage of those as often as we can. But till next week, when we'll be talking to you on Monday night, good luck and God bless. Rick, thanks for staying up late.
Oh, thank you. And Sean and Addison, thanks so much for being here, and good luck and safe travels.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
You got an open invite anytime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got something.
Thank
We'd love to have you back on. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Guess Aubrey's already gone.
Bye, guys.
end our simulcast. And we'll get the audio file to the producer. He'll have it out on the podcast apps within a couple of hours. Oh, yeah, we're done. So, what's really creepy, we have 49 people down here watching, an empty session here. Hey, thanks for listening to WeatherBrains, those of you on YouTube. We are also simulcasting on Song of the Night on Periscope. But really good show tonight. Very timely. And again, thanks for everybody. And I had to miss the end, but I always listen to the podcast version. So for all you folks on WeatherBrains, thanks a lot for listening. Have a marvelous, marvelous weekend. God bless.